First, some important stories from the world over. A dozen Catholic churches have been desecrated across France over the period of a week. Last Sunday, marauders set fire to the church of Saint-Sulpice, one of Paris's largest and most important churches, shortly after the 12 o'clock Mass, causing hundreds of millions in damages. In Nimes, near the border of Spain, the church of Notre-Dame des Enfants was desecrated in a particularly odious way, with vandals painting a cross with human excrement. They stole communion hosts and tossed them into the garbage. According to reports, 80% of the desecrations in France target Christian churches. The Catholic hierarchy has kept silent about the incidents, acknowledging that only the anti-Christian threat is growing and expressing hope that police will find the perpetrators. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo returned to the Middle East this week to push for action against Iran. Pompeo began his trip in Kuwait on Tuesday and headed to Israel Wednesday. His trip will also take him to Lebanon. In Israel, Pompeo met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel has been cracking down on Iran-backed missile strikes on Tel Aviv, launched from the Golan Heights. Pompeo said that on his third stop in Beirut, the focus would be on how the U.S. can help protect Lebanon from the Iran-Hezbollah threat. The U.S. considers Hezbollah a pro-Iranian terrorist organization, though it is represented in the coalition government of Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri. Here with analysis on all of this and much more, I'm joined by national security, foreign policy expert, and former foreign policy advisor to the president, Dr. Walid Phares. Walid, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Raymond.
Let's start with these horrific attacks in New Zealand. 50 people lost their lives. This madman goes into mosques and opens fire. He's recording it the whole time, premeditated, live streaming the whole thing. What is the lesson to be learned from this evolving terror threat that we're seeing?
It was horrible, especially that he broadcast this on social media. My first concern is the lesson that other extremists could do it from all quarters. And so we have to be very careful. When we spot an extremist, this is where we should start acting. I think New Zealand now has joined the nations who have been targeted by extremism, not just this type of extremism, but other types as well.
What does it tell us about the way it's being framed? This guy is obviously claims to be a white supremacist, seems to be a white supremacist. He wrote this manifesto. He obviously wanted a lot of attention. What did New Zealand do wrong, and what can we learn from them?
Look, this reminds me of Breivik in Norway. You have all these mutations. I mean, there is an ideological debate. We have the far left, we have the far right, we have the far everything. We have the Islamists, jihadists, fascists, everything you want. That kind of terrorism backed by this ideology is a mutation that is not even accepted by the extremists. I mean, he constructed his own ideology. He has been inspired by people who wrote about that, but he created his own doctrine. And that is very serious because other cases could develop as well. What is very important, and we need to be very careful about, not to link his doctrine to mainstream religious or political movements, because that is exactly what he wants.
Now, you said on Fox News the other day that there is a relationship between Islamophobia and jihadism. Explain that, because this is being written off as an Islamophobic attack, and we have members of the Muslim community, CARE and others, saying it's coming here.
Well,
they're feeling it here.
CARE will use any incident, any massacre to basically develop their own political agenda. There's no doubt about that. I'm not even worried about that. The public opinion knows what is the case. I would be concerned about the public opinion in the Muslim community, the silent majority. They feel insecure, but here's the explanation. Islamophobia is the irrational fear of Islam. It exists, it's in the debate. Jihadism is an ideology that wants to establish a violent caliphate, so on and so forth. Those who fear, basically, are fed by the jihadists. The jihadists are feeding that fear with the statements that they are making, with the YouTube, with the ISIS, etc. So the Islamophobe, the normal Islamophobe, are people who have an irrational fear of what the ISIS people are doing and saying. And it's also true the other way around. The jihadists, basically, the formation of those jihadists, when they see these acts of attacks against the Muslims, and they are portrayed precisely by these lobbies as anti-Islam, who is going to respond to that? the jihadists, which explains why when this happened, you had ISIS saying, oh, we will respond against that.
Right.
Who's responsible for that? Those who made this into an actual Islamophobia.
I imagine this is very similar to what we're seeing in Turkey from the president there. Tell us about how he used this tragedy to his own political advantage. Of course, he's running again, right?
Yeah, well, that was my first point.
Yeah, he's got a campaign underway.
He is running, but this is too much. This is jogging, and that would actually create problems in Turkey and the Middle East. President Erdogan sort of responded to this as if this was an attack by the Christian world in the medieval times, Crusaders against the caliphate. That is irresponsible in my view. He should actually isolate it and said this has nothing to do with the relationship between governments around the world, at least since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. He should be aware of that.
Yeah. Contrast the coverage of this with what we're seeing in Nigeria, where you have Christians slaughtered, hundreds of thousands. This gets zero coverage, no coverage, in the United States or anywhere else.
It is so bad to make the comparisons in general between violence and violence. They're all to be pushed against. I mean, if you had a tape of those jihadi attackers against those Christian villages and see, and you see basically the bloodshed, you would have a worldwide reaction. The problem is that not every single event has been covered by the media, but there is something else. In general terms, somehow mainstream media is not interested in covering persecution of Christians or Hindus or others, or moderate Muslims as well.
Right, right, which is another major group that's targeted routinely by the caliphate, by these ISIS fighters, and it just doesn't get covered at all.
Moderate Muslims do not count in the media.
Let's talk for a moment about China before we return to ISIS, because there's some big news I'll share with you in a moment. In China, we are seeing this ongoing persecution of Christians, churches decimated. The Vatican signed a pact with the Chinese regime. 6 months ago, they thought they'd get concessions. Doesn't seem they've gotten too many. Now President Xi is in Rome, and the Pope has been begging him for a meeting. He's not giving him a meeting. Any idea why he wouldn't want to meet with Xi? I've read with the Pope. I've read in some reports that Xi's getting pushback for the pact, for the Vatican sign-over.
He is from inside the Communist Party ruling China, because should it be the issue of religious freedom or the issue of any other type of freedom, then China will start to change. I mean, look what happened in East Germany, what happened to the Soviet Union. They know that. So they are ready to trade with you, to cut deals on economics and everything, but not on ideas. If you tell them, give freedom to the Christian communities or even to the Muslim communities in Xinjiang.
Right, they're rounding them up and putting them in internment camps.
That would be the beginning of the next stage that this leadership doesn't want to get to.
Let's talk about this, these atrocities in France. Everybody's scratching their head. You have both the officials, church officials, as well as the police saying, well, we don't have any suspects here for these church desecrations. 12 churches, altars demolished, tabernacles ripped out, burned. One of these hundreds of millions of dollars we reported on a moment ago. Who do you think and what do you think is driving this?
What I know, what we all know, what the French know, is that the French have one of the best internal security intelligence, renseignements généraux. For much lesser than that, they will get you all the information who did it. When you have 10, 12 churches, especially of these type of churches, historical, desecrated and then attacked, I think that at some level in France, they don't want to reveal at this point in time to the public who are the perpetrators. They think that is at a level of national security, because if they reveal it, then the French could have a reaction against the perpetrators.
And they're already having this. They're already having problems with their vested people. Yellow vests, the neon vests, they're already up in arms. Let's talk about Mike Pompeo in the Middle East this week. The president tweeting out just today that the Golan Heights should be in the possession of Israel. Of course, attacks were launched earlier this week, last week, from the Golan Heights. Your thoughts on what's happening there and the purpose of this trip, the importance of it?
Well, first of all, Secretary Pompeo understands very well where the threat is coming. And in our conversation, you and I, we discussed that his central attention is Iran. Wherever the Iranian regime is expanding, including north of the Golan Heights, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, in Iraq and elsewhere, this is where he's going to try to create this coalition, this Arab NATO, Middle Eastern NATO, probably a coordination between the Arabs and Israel. That's what he's trying to do. Problem is that the Iranians are all over the place. They are already, as I said, in Lebanon and they're in Yemen. So it's a tall order to be able to reverse what the Iranians have been trying to do for the last 5 years.
Wow, I want to play this for you. This is President Trump earlier this week holding up a map of the ISIS presence when he was elected and present day. Watch.
I brought this out for you because this is a map of everything in the red. This was on election night in 2016. Everything red is ISIS. When I took it over, it was a mess. Now, on the bottom, that's the exact same. There is no red. In fact, there's actually a tiny spot which will be gone by tonight. So that's ISIS, red right there. And the bottom one is how it is today.
Is this really the collapse of ISIS? Is that really what we're seeing here?
Look at the map of the president, and he has been in all his life a real estate strategist.
Right.
The real estate of ISIS
Is gone.
Is gone. My problem is that who is going to be the inheritant? Because this is a real estate. It's gone. Who is going to come and replace?
Because this is a battle. This is an ideology.
It's a battle of ideology.
It's not a place. It's not a state.
Yes, that's a problem. So the concern is, will a neo-ISIS come back? Will Al-Qaeda in Syria come back? Will the Turks move in? Will Assad, will the Iranian militia go in? That's the real question that we need to address.
Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, talked about some of our national security threats. She said one of the most, I guess, underviewed or ignored is cyber terrorism. Do you see that as a growing threat? And from whom would it come? China?
The capacity of those who have the weapons to attack us with cyber elements is large, and it could create havoc in this country. Yes, there is a list that the Secretary has announced, including China first, has huge capabilities, and Russia, and North Korea, and Iran, but also private sector, all organizations and criminal organizations. They all have this capacity. But here's my answer. I think we're not prepared. We will never be prepared fully. We can't be ahead of that cyber threat. But one thing is sure. If we are attacked by a regime or a government, maybe they will cause a lot of havoc in the first strike. We will get them on the second strike. We have always the resources, and the Secretary said that. We have the intellectual and scientific resources, but we've can't
yet
always
to employ them.
Yes.
Tell me for a moment, as I watched the international news coverage this past week, the focus has been on nationalism as a threat, that this is its own ideology that must be checked and watched. In your opinion, is nationalism or jihadism the greater threat the Western world faces?
Look, I did almost a PhD dissertation back in the old days in Lebanon, master's dissertation on nationalism. People don't understand what they're talking about when they're talking about nationalism. Nationalism is embedded in every single nation around the world. Then it grows either into extreme nationalism or it shrinks into patriotism. So extreme nationalism becomes, extremism and terrorism, and we live it here, we live it in Europe. But to say that nationalism is international, by essence, nationalism cannot be international. The one that is international are the jihadists, because they want to establish a worldwide caliphate. They can coordinate among themselves. Extreme nationalists cannot coordinate among themselves. I mean, from Austria to Chile to Brazil to the Arab national, how can they coordinate? Because all what they're saying, it's about us only. So by theory, I don't think you could compare the jihadists to the nationalists.
Before I let you go, we talked about the shrinking real estate of ISIS. Where are they now? Where are these fighters now and their families?
Okay.
Are they in Syria? Are they in Iran? Where are they?
Look, first of all, when a building collapses, that's a real estate. Where do they go? Below. They are underground. And of course, underground, you don't have families, you don't have large population, you have cells. And these cells have begun to strike in Iraq and Syria. Other cells are going to try to reach the west. So crushing ISIS in Iraq and Syria may have another reaction, which is more attacks in the west. Because, as I explained it, when they had this huge land, 90% of their activities was to manage the land. Now they don't have the land.
Amazing. Walid Phares, thank you for the insight. We'll be checking in the days ahead. You can keep up with Dr. Walid Phares, his columns, his media appearances, by following him on Twitter @Walid Phares, and I'll tweet his handle out so you have it.